Welcome back to our notes on the early River Valley civilizations. So we just finished talking about Egypt, and I want to take a minute to review our essential questions for this set of notes, talk a little bit about some of what we've already learned. So for question number 1 here, we actually already talked a little bit about how going from the Neolithic Revolution, when humans first learned how to farm, they started settling down and staying in one place instead of living like nomads where they moved constantly from one place to the next looking for more resources. Now they had more than they could use in any short amount of time, so they could stay put. They had more food, they could store it places. So this is what really leads to the first civilizations. And it kind of also ties into question 2 here when we think about how did these first places that people settled down and started building up, these buildings and homes, cities, how does that contribute to science, math, government, art? Well, if you think about it, number 1, you have a need for new inventions, right? If you're a farmer, you want to find a quicker way to get water from the river to your crops to make that easier for you. You want to find an easier way to carry all the food, all the grain that you just, harvested to a storehouse. You need a storehouse to build it in, so you need to learn how to build a building that's going to keep it fresh. And all of these things just kind of grow exponentially. And with that, you also are going to need people in charge to make sure everything's going smoothly and that it's happening in a way that's fair. So you also need something like a government. Now, we haven't talked much about law codes yet, and we're going to get there. Law codes are going to come right out of that government and the need for a government. But the first law code we're going to talk about a little bit later when we learn about ancient Babylon. For today, we're going to focus on ancient India. So first, we will start with the first cities to be built in ancient India. And there are 2 major cities that ancient India is known for. That's Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Now, both of these cities had walls built around them, and that was for protection from outsiders. So unlike Egypt, that had lots of great already natural barriers to protect them, these cities needed something extra, so they built their own walls. If you were an archaeologist, a modern-day archaeologist, you might go to a dig site like these pictured here. These are photos from these cities. And so this one right here is a photo from the dig in Harappa. And it shows us basically the bones, the bare bones of some old structures that used to stand here. And what archaeologists have learned is that in Harappa there were houses that had different sizes. And what does that tell us about India and ancient Indians? It tells us that some people were wealthier and had larger homes, and some people were less wealthy and had smaller homes, not unlike today. So they already can surmise that there is some social inequality in ancient India because there are these different house sizes. They're also impressed by the different structures that are used, such as public baths. So I know that sounds gross to you because you're like, ugh, I don't want to take a bath with everybody else in the middle of the city. But that was normal at the time. That was something that wasn't unusual. And so this picture down here is a public bath, and you can see steps leading down in. It just looks like a giant swimming pool, but it was used for bathing. And in this and other parts of the city, there were really impressive drainage systems. And if you think about it, these civilizations, these guys started from scratch. They'd never seen a toilet before. They'd never, it's not like us nowadays. If I said, go build a house from nothing, that would be a pretty big assignment for you to do already in modern day, but you could figure out what you needed and how to do certain things and probably get someone to help you. Whereas these civilizations, they're coming up with this as they go along, so that's what makes it even more impressive. They had some very advanced systems for draining water, so that's pretty cool. Now, unfortunately for India, ancient India, they were not built around a river that was as reliable as the Nile. So remember, our early river valley civilizations all these people settled next to rivers so that they could farm. And so For ancient India, that was the Indus River. And that's easy to remember. Indus, India. So the Indus River was not as consistent as the Nile in that it didn't flood at the same time every year, and it didn't get lower at the same time every year. It was kind of hard to read. And so a lot of natural disasters and floods happened that really messed with these cities. And so they were weakened. They were vulnerable to outsiders and invaders. And lo and behold, there was this group called the Aryans in the area that were very good at warfare and saw this opportunity and took it. So they come in around 1500 BCE to take over the Indian civilization successfully. Now, what are some of the things that we get from ancient India? One of the big things is they introduced iron, which was very useful for tools and weapons, and they also introduced a new writing language, which is called Sanskrit. Now, let's look at Indian society. So not unlike Egyptian society, if you were to draw a picture, it'd be like a pyramid, and it would have the lowest class as the largest, and then the highest class is the smallest, the least amount of people. But what's different is that Indian society was organized into what we call a caste system. And your caste is your social status. So we would say, I'm upper class, middle class, lower class. They would say, I'm high caste or low caste. And then each caste had a different name. So what's very unique about this is that a caste system is very strict. There's no movement from one level to another. So unlike in Egypt, where a young boy could go and become a scribe, and maybe he was a peasant, now he can move up in status, in Indian society, that's it. Whatever you're born, you're stuck as for the rest of your life. So the castes go all the way from priests at the top down to peasants, but believe it or not, there's a level below peasants. So we're kind of like, wait, what? I thought peasants were the lowest. Well, in ancient India, there was a caste lower than that. In fact, it hasn't gone away. It still exists. And that is called the untouchables. The untouchables were so low in social standing that they weren't even considered human. To give you an example of how they were viewed and treated, if you go to India and you walk around, it's not hard to find somewhere to buy chai, which is tea. If you were an untouchable, you got something different than everybody else. Most people would get a reusable cup that would be cleaned, a nice, maybe porcelain cup. But if you're an untouchable, you get a clay cup. And once you're done drinking your chai, that cup gets smashed on the ground. Why? Because no one wants to touch it after you have, because you are an untouchable. They don't want to touch you or anything you have come into contact with. So can you imagine being born into this class, which it has nothing to do with any accomplishments in your life. It's what family you're born into, and you are made an untouchable, and this is how you're treated for your whole life. That's kind of depressing, right? Why is this done? So we'll come back to that a little bit later. But let's zoom in a little bit closer to social life among the families. In most Asian societies, family is the biggest, most important thing. So your social life really revolved around your family. Your extended family all lived together, so grandparents, parents, children, all under one roof. And in Indian society, when it came to male versus female relations, only males were educated, and women had a lot lower status than men. So Egypt, if this was, men and women, then India, it was more like this. It was a lot bigger difference. In fact, if you look at Indian society today, it's still behind a lot of other parts of the world as far as gender equality, because it's so ingrained in Indian culture that women were a lower status. To give you an example of this, there is a practice called sati. Sati is related to what happens when somebody dies. So most Indians are Hindu, and in Hinduism, if someone dies, their body is cremated, and they are burned on a stack of wood called a pyre. And if you were a woman and you were married, if he died, you were expected as an Indian woman to jump on the pyre with his body and burn and die with him. And wow, that was something that, a lot of you might go, well, I wouldn't do it. Why would women, do that? No one would do that in their right mind. But the problem was, if a woman didn't do it, she was so socially ostracized and just looked down on and seen as a huge disgrace, so much so that many women felt that it was better to die than to live that kind of a life. And so they really didn't have a choice in this society. Let's touch a little bit on Hinduism. We won't go into the details now because you're going to learn more about it later, but I'll just give you some big picture things. So Hinduism is the main religion in India. It still is today, and it's one of the earliest religions in the world. And it is a religion that is polytheistic. If you remember from Egypt, that means they believe in many gods. Poly, many, theism, gods. So their beliefs come from a set of books called the Vedas that are written in Sanskrit. They believe in one unifying force in the world that is called Brahman. It is a form of ultimate reality. So the individual person's goal in life is to know this ultimate reality. And this is why Hinduism is tied very much to meditation. That's one thing that kind of helps with that. Now, Hindus also believe in something called reincarnation. If you are reincarnated, it means that when you die, your body dies, but you are reborn into a new body and a new life. And you're just constantly going through this cycle. So it's like when you hear someone say in a past life, I was blank. They're talking about reincarnation. That's what that's referencing. And what you're born as in your new life depends on what you did in your old life. And this is called karma. So karma, we all joke about karma. Your friend makes fun of you in the hallway because of your new haircut, and then they walk into an open door and hit their head, and you say, ha, karma, right? Now, karma, that's kind of similar. But in Hindu religion, karma is this belief that if you live a good life, then when you die and you're reborn, you can be reborn into something even better. And so this is what gave some hope to people who, for example, were in the untouchables group. They believed then that if they lived a really good life, even though they were at the lowest of the low, that they could be reborn into a higher caste. Also, that reinforces the way that people view them, right? Remember, they treat them like garbage. They were, not human. And why? Because Hindus believed that that person must have done something really bad in their previous life to be born into that status. So that's why they treat them so badly, because they see it as that's karma. That's what they earned in this life. So this kind of keeps that balance of, well, I'm going to try to live a good life because in my next life, I'm hoping to, move on up. Let's talk a little bit about some of the political leaders in ancient India. So there are what we call many dynasties in Indian history. And a dynasty is just political leaders within the same family. If one leader, a king, dies and his son takes the throne, and his son takes the throne after him, and his son after him, that's what we call a dynasty. So there are two major dynasties that are very well known in Indian history. One is called the Mauryan dynasty, and the other is the Gupta dynasty. So with the Mauryan dynasty, this is in the 300s BCE. This is founded by someone named Chandragupta Maurya. So this dynasty was known for having a very centralized government, meaning that all the power was sort of centered in one group or person. And then they divided themselves into provinces, which are smaller portions to be ruled differently. So then another important Mauryan leader is named Ashoka. Ashoka was the grandson of Chandragupta, and he is considered by many to be the greatest ruler in Indian history. And one of the biggest reasons that he is so beloved is that he was a very kind ruler. He was known as being very kind to his people. So after he died, things never quite got back to that level. And then after he dies, the kingdom starts to decline. Now, once that starts to go downhill, another dynasty down the line that's going to come up into power is called the Guptas. The Guptas are going to make some progress. They're going to expand back to where they used to be, the former glory of Indian society and civilization, by expanding what used to be a really large empire. But unfortunately, they're going to fall to a group called the Huns that are going to come from China. Now, we're going to touch on another religion that comes out of ancient India, and this is somewhat related to Hinduism. It comes out of Hinduism, but it's going to change some things up. And so this is Buddhism, which you've probably heard of. Buddhism is named after the founder. Now, it's founded by someone named Siddhartha Gautama. And so you'll say, well, wait a second, that's not Buddha. But it is. Buddha is just a title. Buddha means enlightened one. And so it's just a name, a title given to this man who was named Siddhartha Gautama. Now, let's backtrack a little bit. Siddhartha Gautama started off living a life of luxury. He lived in a palace, and he was kept pretty much under house arrest for most of his young life by his father. And he lived in luxury. He had everything he could ever need, but he wanted to get out of the palace and see the world. So he finally gets out and sees the world, and he realizes that it's not all lovely and great and luxurious like his life in the palace. He realizes that there is a lot of pain and a lot of suffering in the world, and he decides to give up his life of luxury and be a part of this world to better understand it. And so he is seeking something deeper, a deeper meaning in life. And so he goes out and he is able to sort of reach this level of what we would call nirvana. And no, not like the band Nirvana, but it's this level of inner peace in a world that is chaotic, that brings understanding and brings spiritual enlightenment. And so that's why he gets the name Buddha, because he reaches nirvana and is considered enlightened. So that is the founding. Now, some of the major beliefs of Buddhism, they are based on 4 big ideas called the Four Noble Truths. Buddhists are very similar to Hindus in the sense that they accept reincarnation, they believe in reincarnation, but what they don't accept from Hinduism is the caste system. And it makes sense that this, very free-spirited, open-minded person would not like the restriction of a caste system. And so what's interesting is that this appeals very much to the lower levels of society in ancient India, right? Because they believed that they were stuck in their caste their whole life, and that was it, and they just had to hope for a better life in the next life. But this appeals to those lower levels of society, which, remember, in the pyramid, that's the larger group. So it's going to become very popular. Other thing that's interesting about Buddhism is that Buddha did not want to be worshipped. So nowadays we think of Buddha and we think of him almost like a god. And Buddha, the person of Siddhartha Gautama, who is the Buddha, did not want that. That wasn't what he was seeking when he started this. What it started as was just a way of thinking, a philosophy, and a way of thinking about life and how you live and what is right and wrong and all of that. It wasn't as much of a religion when he started it. Now, Buddhism has become, since ancient history, it started in India, and nowadays it's more popular. We know it associated more with China, but it's still practiced all over the world. So let's talk about what are the main contributions of ancient India to the greater world, right? This is world history. So one big thing that we get from ancient India is literature, writing and stories and books. And in fact, Indians love to tell stories, and they're very good at it. Their history is very rich in oral history, and what that means is telling stories more than writing them down. And they do write them down as well, but they pass them down from generation to generation just by telling stories. So they have a lot of wonderful literature that comes out of ancient India. Also, we get really beautiful architecture, and most of it is based on the religious architecture of India, because with a polytheistic religion, that has that literally thousands of different gods. Their temples are covered in these beautiful depictions of all these different gods and goddesses. The Taj Mahal is a famous wonder of the world. It's a palace that was built in India. So a lot of great architecture. And they also are the people who created algebra. So algebra, whether you love it or hate it, I know a lot of you are taking it right now, is a foundation for a lot of other types of mathematics. It's used in so many different ways in the world, and so it is very, very important. So that is a major, major contribution from ancient India as well. And that brings us to the end of our notes on ancient India.